everyone. Let me know if you can hear me. I think it should be all set. Maybe just pop it in the chat if you could. Just want to make sure that you can hear, and then we'll just wait one more minute. Okay, awesome. You guys can hear me. Just let everyone kind of trickle in, and then we will begin shortly. All right, looks like we have a good group coming in and it's 2 minutes past, so we will kick this off. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be a great presentation where we will learn about the cybersecurity landscape, how we are seeing trends evolve, and the different types of attacks and how they form. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation. We'll definitely try to get to all questions at the end. Here at TekDoc, we use Barracuda to keep our emails safe, secure, and running efficiently. And to talk with you all today, we have Kyle Marson, the Senior Systems Engineer at Barracuda with us. So Kyle, if you don't mind taking it away.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. So as mentioned, we're going to take a look at the evolving cybersecurity landscape, some of the different threats. We'll kind of go over what we at Barracuda are seeing out in the wild today in terms of email and security. So we'll cover all of that. So just to kind of start, when we think about cybercrime, we think about crime in general. It's changed over the years. So it's no longer profitable for somebody to try to break into a building and steal some assets and things like that. It's changed in a way that it's way easier now to go ahead and just try and steal digital information. And that actually has, as we'll see, a huge payout in the long run for them. And there's a lot of valuable information that someone can gain access to. It could be something like credit card numbers, it may be people's personal information, maybe they want to gain access to a list of emails. And the most serious thing that they're stealing now are actually access to people's credentials to gain access into companies' environments. And these are all things that can be ransomed, right? So you think of all of that. The goal is they want to steal somebody's information and they want to go ahead and sell it back to them, or maybe sell it to some other cyber criminals for various different purposes. So the obligatory, news headlines, everyone's kind of numb to them now, but we've seen over the years just tons and tons of different threats make the headlines of different attacks that have gotten through. So what we want to focus on today is a multi-layered email protection approach. So when we kind of look at this chart here, we start down at the bottom. Everyone's got some kind of email system, whether it's Office 365, G Suite, Exchange, you name it, everyone's using email for business now. And we kind of look at the email security layering from the bottom up. So everyone needs to have a gateway defense. This is going to protect inbound email, outbound email, if there's any kind of compliance or requirements to make sure that your emails are encrypted, that there's DLP policies in place, and that you're archiving should you need to. There's some aspect of resiliency that's needed. So what happens if users either accidentally or maliciously delete email or files? We want to make sure that there's backup of that data. And what happens if the mail server goes offline? Even Microsoft has temporary outages from here and there. We want to make sure that there's some kind of email continuity tool in place so that everyone can keep working. And then as we layer up, we start getting into the more sophisticated types of defense for the more sophisticated types of attacks. So there's API inbox defense. So this is looking for things like spear phishing. We want to watch out for social engineering attacks. We want to make sure that nobody's able to pretend to be you out to your customers and do harm to your brand. And what happens inevitably when a user gives their password away? We want to make sure that there's account takeover defense as well. And then it's subtle and it's something that's often overlooked, but awareness is a huge defense in terms of protecting against threats. And that's end user awareness. Training, phishing simulation, it's really good practice to make sure that the users at a company who are the ones that are actually being attacked are a strength in the security posture rather than a weakness. And then off to the right, kind of encompassing all of it, if there is any threat in any of those layers, we want to make sure that there's detection and we want to make sure that there's simple remediation options. So lined up with this multi-layer defense is where Barracuda's multi-layer email protection comes into play. So for the gateway and resiliency layer, we offer Barracuda Essentials. On top of that is the Sentinel product, which is looking at that spear phishing and account takeover. And then Barracuda Fish Line is helping train users and protect them against these attacks. And then Barracuda Forensics and Incident Response wraps them all in together, which allows administrators to be able to easily detect and remediate any potential threats. So we're going to talk about all of these different layers today and some of the different threats that we see in each of these layers. So I wanted to start with some statistics here. There's a prediction that by the end of this year, that there'll be over $20 billion in damages due to ransomware attacks. And this is against all types of businesses, large and small. So this 20 billion is up from about 11 billion last year, 5 billion 2 years ago, 300 million in 2015. So as you guys can see, it's growing exponentially. And it's actually becoming a big business for these attackers. And that's just the monetary value. That's what people have paid due to ransoms. That doesn't even take into account different intangibles. So if you think about it, if you guys are attacked, if there's ransomware, maybe your data is taken hostage, you have to release that to your customers, release that to the public. What does that do to the long-term reputation of your brand? So, if you guys are a target, you get attacked, that could ultimately result in lost business of people that may not, trust the security or the integrity of their data within your system. So that 20 billion is just what was paid alone. So let's talk about ransomware. We'll talk about the evolution of it, but first, for anyone that's not aware, let's go ahead and define it. So ransomware is a type of malware, and the goal is it's going to infect the system. It wants to take control of it. It wants to go ahead and encrypt it in some way, and then it wants to ransom that data. It wants to charge you for access back to your data. So the attackers usually demand something like Bitcoin. It's untraceable, it's easy, and the goal is you guys pay, you get your data back, hopefully. So malware is basically anything that's going to corrupt your system in one form or another, and it's usually transferred by email. So email is definitely the biggest threat vector that we see there. There's other ways to do it. Sometimes they drop USB keys. There's malicious websites that might have ransomware that people accidentally download. These are all different sorts of threat vectors, but email is far and away the biggest one. And it started out in the past that there was an attacker and they needed to understand what a company did. They needed to know what was the purpose of that company, what industry are they in, who are the competitors, what ways can they infiltrate the network, and then ultimately what data can I find that someone can pay me to release it. And that was kind of the start of it. And that was a pretty tough task. So it required a lot of programming experience, a lot of understanding of certain industries, the competitors, and these were often highly orchestrated attacks. But unfortunately, this has become much more of an automated process today. Instead of having to understand a business, I can actually just go into any organization, get my generic ransomware installed, lock up all of their data and IP, and then they're going to go ahead and pay me so I can sell it back to them. I don't need to know what their business does. I don't need to know who their competitors are. I just need to know how to get this application within their system. So it's a really tough situation because attackers don't care who they're attacking. They're trying to attack anyone that they can get this data into. So it's not like back in the day when people were focused on highly sophisticated attacks against large companies. It's just as lucrative now if they get 10 small companies as it would be to get one large company. So it's an interesting time where anyone is susceptible. So let's take a look at some of the current threats and trends that we're seeing. So obviously ransomware is the big one in the headlines because of the immediate financial impact it can have, but we'll talk about some of the other threats and trends as we go. So Barracuda Security Insights is a tool where Barracuda actually tracks the different types of attacks that we're seeing coming into all of our systems. And this is all around the world. So it's broken out by some different product categories. There's network threats, web threats, and email threats. As you can see here off to the right, the largest threat that we see is email. So of the almost 28,000 threats that have came in, almost 27,000 of those came in via email. And that's just over the last 24 hours. I pulled this information this morning. If we kind of expand it out over the past 30 days, we saw 19 million attacks, 18.5 million of which came in via email. So it just kind of shows you guys what a threat email is and what an opportunity it is for these attackers. So we're going to talk about Barracuda email security with ATP. So this is actually that gateway level defense. If you guys think about what we looked at first, it's going to be protecting the inbound and the outbound email. It's looking at spam. It's looking at attachments for that malware that we're talking about, that ransomware. It gives the ability to encrypt or set up DLP policies to make sure that employees aren't sending out anything that they shouldn't be. And it's really fast and easy. And it's backed by that global threat intelligence network that we just looked at. So most attacks today start with email. Almost 3/4 of every attack starts with an attachment or a link. So there's different kinds of threat vectors like we talked about, but most of them start with cybersecurity and phishing emails. So there's CEO fraud. There can be infected attachments. Maybe it's fake website links. All different ways to try to trick users to actually get into an environment. So it's pretty interesting here. 3 out of every 4 cybersecurity threats originate with illegitimate emails. So clearly, email phishing attacks represent one of the greatest threats to data security today. So again, we'll go ahead, we'll define phishing. I think most people have probably heard the term phishing at this point, but really it's just somebody pretending to be someone else at your company. The purpose is usually to get personal information or to try to get you to click on a link, which in turn could install that malware like we talked about before, or get ransomware put onto your computer, or maybe they're just trying to trick a user into providing some kind of information. They just want to find out credentials, they want to find out information about the business. So if we take that a step further, it's actually something that's called spear phishing. So spear phishing is the same idea as phishing, but it's very targeted. It's usually a phishing attack that's dedicated at one specific individual. The other unique thing about spear phishing is that it's things like the standard email gateway that are preventing against known malware, known ransomware, things with malicious payloads. They're not going to be able to pick up on these phishing or spear phishing attacks because there's no payload. There's no bad links. There's no bad attachments. It's usually sent to one person. Oftentimes with these attacks, they're registering a new email or maybe using an email address they've stolen from somebody in the past. So it's not on anybody's block lists. It's literally just a string of text is what makes spear phishing really dangerous. Because if an attacker can understand what an organization does, for example, maybe they know that the C-levels are at a conference. They can track down the organizational structure and they can say, oh, you know what, this person's the CFO. They're the person who's responsible for accounts payable. They're a prime target for these spear phishing attacks because there's some monetary value that can be gained by tricking this person. So that's where they can start constructing emails to make it look like maybe they're a CEO or somebody else, and start sending them to the CFO asking for wire payments, asking for accounts to be changed. These threats are usually pretty sophisticated, and there's some research that goes into it. So social media has made research a lot easier to see the different hierarchies within the companies. But it makes it easy to see who they want to pretend to be and who they want to attack. So in this case, where the CFO is at a conference, they can make a comment, hey, nice to meet you there, nice to see you there, and make a legitimate looking email that kind of references previous experiences. So the person receiving the email thinks there's no way some random attacker can know I was at this conference. This has to be a legitimate email. And that's how they get it. They gain trust, they use social engineering, and it's just text-based emails that come in and unfortunately trick lots of users. So about 52% of all attacks that we see against small businesses today are phishing emails. So if we go back and think about, it's no longer the large companies that are being targeted, it's the small organizations that are being attacked more and more. This 52% starts to make sense. And this is actually up from 48% in the previous year. So there's a couple different strategies that phishing emails might install malware, install ransomware. That's going to go up and end up costing you immediate funds to go ahead and buy your information back. But it could also be that the phishing email is trying to get credentials. So maybe a bad actor could slowly infiltrate the organization or use it as a point for command and control. So now they've gained access to maybe administrator accounts. Now they can actually go ahead and start taking control over an environment. So there's a lot of malicious things that can go through email that everyone needs to start paying attention to. So about 23% of those phishing emails that are sent are actually opened by the recipient, which is a terrifying number. So almost 1 out of every 4 phishing attacks is at least opened. And then 11% of those users that actually open those phishing emails also click on a link or an attachment. And maybe the most troubling here is the 43%. So that's the percentage of spear phishing attacks that target businesses with 250 or fewer employees. So again, just to kind of emphasize, it's no longer the corporations, the enterprises of the world that are under attack, but the smaller businesses. And about 95% of all cybercrime incidents are related to human-enabled errors. So it's what we're talking about here, tricking somebody into taking some action that they wouldn't have otherwise taken. So just some interesting things to share. Just to kind of cement how devoted these attackers are into getting into the network and making this a continuously profitable industry for them. There are actually some analytics that go into it. So they're taking a look at what times of the week to send attacks. Maybe they see here, you know what, it looks like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. People are busy at work and maybe they're just trying to get stuff off of their plate. Let's go ahead, we'll send our attacks there because we've had the most success on Tuesdays. So, we found out that this is the best time to launch attacks. No surprise, people don't miss an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis or take advantage of something good in this case. So we see right around the winter holiday season, maybe people are taking vacations, maybe IT staff is a little bit thin, maybe people are working out of pocket more because they're distracted by other things, but we can see this is when the most attacks come in, so no surprise. Maybe users, don't have the ability to check up on everything. They're just trying to get stuff done before the new year, before they go on break. So they're in a rush just to respond to emails. And attackers know this. So this is when they actually start sending more and more attacks right around this period of time. So they're actually paying attention to how successful certain attacks are so that they can go ahead and adapt and make sure that they're taking advantage. And just like businesses run analytics around successful campaigns, so don't the attackers. So there's different types of phishing attacks that they use. I'll talk about those. The main ones that we see are brand impersonation, business email compromise, and blackmail is still a huge one. So we'll go ahead and define those so that people can realize what's going on in these different situations. So the first, and this is the most common one that we see, this is brand impersonation. So this is someone saying, hi, I'm Google. Hey, I'm PayPal. Your account's been compromised and we just need you to verify that you're you. Please click this link, enter your information so that you don't get locked out. So this was a huge issue for PayPal back in the day. With email, you want to make sure that you're also protecting your reputation. So from their perspective, they were also getting harmed because anyone that fell victim to these PayPal attacks, now, if there was a legitimate PayPal email coming in, they didn't necessarily trust them. And this could potentially happen to you guys as well. So if there's anyone that is pretending to be you and trying to trick your customers, if they happen to fall business, now maybe they're a little wary of doing business with you. So just something to keep in mind. Implement something like DMARC into the DNS to make sure that you're the only one that has validation to send email from your domain. Otherwise, you can get into similar situations. And we found that 83% of spear phishing attacks involve brand impersonation. So again, far and away the most common type of attack that we see. So the second way that spear phishing attacks are delivered is through business email compromise. So this is an exploit in which the attackers actually gain access to an account and they go ahead and they imitate the owner or some high-level executive. And their goal is they want to go ahead and defraud the company and its employees, customers, partners. Oftentimes with these, an attacker is going to create an account with an email address that looks almost identical to the one on the corporate network. And they rely on the assumed trust between the victim and the actual owner of the email account to get some information. So for example, if someone was to send an email from Barracuda, but instead of 2 R's, they had 3 R's, really difficult for somebody to detect. And that's how a lot of these attacks happen. There's a lot of spear phishing attacks that use this type of method. And it's the troublesome thing is that if an attacker is actually able to gain information about the company, so maybe someone's made a phone call saying, hey, we're Microsoft, we need to verify your credentials, and a user actually gives it to them. Now they have login access to an account. This is kind of how email works. So now there's a legitimate mailbox inside the environment that's been compromised. So this makes it really hard to track down, because once they gain access to a legitimate user's credentials and they start logging in as that user, how can you tell what's activity from the actual user versus the person that's logging in with them using their legitimate credentials? So that's not something that's going to be picked up by any kind of email filter, because it is email coming from a legitimate domain, from a legitimate email address. Maybe they're launching these attacks internally though. So you're also going to want to employ some technologies that allow you to make sure that you can see if there's any kind of suspicious activity happening either from the inbox or the account level. Maybe it's emails being sent by someone at an odd time of day. Maybe some inbox rules are being changed, things that don't look common for that user's activity. And the third type of attack that we see is blackmail. So these ones are pretty straightforward. It's an email. Sometimes they send it from what looks like your email address. So they say, hey, we have access to your email account. I can prove this because I sent you an email as you. We saw you on certain websites. We saw you watching something. Sometimes they'll say that they recorded your screen cam and they're going to send it out to everybody unless you pay them money. And they almost never have any of that information, but it's the fear and the panic that cause a lot of people to pay up in these types of situations. So those are the three common types of spear phishing that we see. We talked about this a little bit. What damage can a successful attack do? So it's loss of data potentially if they don't give it back, or if you guys lose it. It's the downtime that it takes to remediate any kind of threat, changing passwords, unencrypting data, lost productivity during that downtime. And then there's things like reputation harm, which we talked about a little bit. Maybe people are a little bit more wary to do business with you now that they know that their data has been stolen before. And then there's the aftermath, things like having to wipe all of the computers. We've seen some scenarios where people actually reverted to doing business to pen and paper for a few days while their systems were completely offline. And it takes time to recover from these attacks to figure out how far things have spread. So it's just overall a really costly thing for a business. So to tie in all of those different things that we looked at, we're now looking at that AI, the account takeover protection, the DMARC. That's what Sentinel is doing for Barracuda. So it's actually an AI engine that's trained against each of your individual tenants, and it builds a behavioral profile on all of the users. So if somebody is pretending to be the CEO, we can see this person's never sent an email from this address before. If it's somebody pretending to be PayPal, we can see PayPal's never linked to this URL before. And if somebody does, in fact, give their credentials away, we can detect that inbox activity. We can detect the inbox rules. We can detect suspicious sign-in activity to go ahead and alert admins that we think someone's given their password away. And then there's also a piece to set up DMARC. So we talked about that brand reputation. How do you make sure that nobody is pretending to be you out to your customers? That's where you get DMARC in place to make sure that you're the only one authorized to send emails from your domain. And we do have an email threat scanner associated with this. So it's a simple free scan. And the goal with that is it's going to go ahead and it's going to scan everyone's inboxes to expose latent threats within the user's actual inboxes. So rather than protect against incoming spear phishing, it generates a one-time report that shows you all of the things that have gotten through existing tools and are actually in people's inboxes today. So today, malware is very different than what we saw a few years ago. We talked about that a little bit. There's a general perception in the marketplace among organizations that they think that tools that they've invested in the past should continue to work well into the future, but that's just not true. So if we think about that idea for a second, compare it to our everyday lives, Back in the day, everybody had a physical office where they would go for the duration of their workday, and that was work. Today, we can work virtually, everyone probably somewhere in a room in their house, in their living room, maybe a coffee shop. So traditionally, working in an office meant that there was a firewall that could protect your systems. And with these new locations, securities had to change. So while your firewall did a great job of protecting the office, it was almost useless unless users were, connecting to their computers through a VPN. So same kind of idea, threats evolve. The attackers find that something's blocking them. It's a business for them too. They're actually working to develop new ways to get through existing systems. So technology needs to advance, the stack needs to advance, and that's where we look at security in layers, where the more layers we add, the more ways that attackers have to get through multiple different systems to be able to get into the data. So we talked a little bit about DMARC. So domain spoofing is definitely one of the most common techniques that we see in impersonation attacks. And DMARC is a technical standard that helps protect email senders and recipients from spam, spoofing, and phishing. So it uses some other tools in DNS, but basically it prevents anyone from impersonating an email from your domain that could ultimately cause that brand reputation that we looked at. Other ways to try to protect yourselves. So this is related to Gmail, but most tools now have multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And that just, again, adding to layers of security. Now, if someone does gain access to credentials, it makes it that much harder for them to log in with those credentials, whether it's, thumbprint, retinal scan. Most often it's just some kind of push notification or code that gets sent to your cell phone. It's something worth looking into. And then another important thing to do is educate users about spear phishing and make it part of an ongoing security awareness training. So you want to ensure that your employees can not only recognize these attacks, but they understand, the fraudulent nature of them. They understand how to report them back to the admin team. And this all helps employees avoid making costly mistakes. It creates guidelines that'll actually put procedures in place, and it prompts employees to confirm requests. So if the CEO is saying, hey, I need $1,000 worth of iTunes gift cards, now they know not only what to look for in these kinds of threats, but how to report them, how to get in touch with the requester to make sure that it is an actual legitimate request that's coming in. So that ties in with that awareness layer that we talked about in the different layered approaches. So managed phish line. So it's end user security awareness training. And the goal is to inform and to test the users. So there's different campaigns and stuff that are created by our technical experts. So we create different content based on relevant threats. So what are we seeing? We talked about threats are evolving. We're able to create content based on those evolving threats to go ahead and train the users. There's some videos, quizzes associated with it, so we can let people know what threats are to look out for. And then kind of the fun part, depending on what side you're on, is there's actually some simulations. So we'll actually send out simulated phishing attacks to users to see if people learned anything from those videos and quizzes. Did they click on links? Did they respond to the email? Are they downloading attachments? And then there's a nice user by user report that's broken out that lets you know how did every individual user interact with stuff. So like I said earlier, the goal with this is to train users and actually turn them into a strength of your security posture versus a liability. And we're not the only ones that are pushing the multi-layered strategy. So as the US Securities and Exchange Commissioner states here, the most successful cyber strategy to adopt is a multi-layered defense system. And to kind of round it all out, what does a multi-layered defense system look like? We talked about it earlier. We have the Barracuda email protection, the gateway defense, resiliency, API inbox defense, awareness, and then rounding it all out is the Barracuda forensics and incident response. And that just kind of brings about Barracuda's defense in depth. So it's not just the email that we layer, but we actually have data security for backups, network security, firewalls, things like that, that we all layer again together to kind of bring one nice ecosystem. So thank you guys for watching. If there's any questions, please submit those to the chat. Please submit them in the Q&A. We want to make sure that we cover all of that for you guys. And feel free to reach out to the team here at TekDoc if you guys have any further questions.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Kyle, that presentation was awesome. Also, I'm realizing now that not everyone might know who I am or be able to see my name or anything. So my name is Sarah. I'm the Sales and Marketing Coordinator at TekDoc. I will second that. Let us know if there's any questions in the chat. We'd be happy to answer those for you. Additionally, please let us know if you're interested in that email threat scanner that Kyle had mentioned, and we would be happy to schedule a time to, get that up and running for you all. As mentioned, you will be receiving a $25 Grubhub credit as a way to say thank you for attending, and hopefully you can have a nice lunch COVID style. And again, like Kyle mentioned, you can reach out to our account managers, Alexa or Camila, or myself if you want to learn more or if you have any further questions about today's presentation. Kyle, do you see any questions coming in just before we wrap it all up?
Yeah, so there's one that actually came in and asked, what's the email threat scan process look like? So that's a great question. So we talked a little bit about that scan, really simple to run, just requires global admin credentials. Just requires global admin credentials to the tenant. And it kind of just runs in the background. So it'll go ahead and look through existing email, and it just exposes any potential threats that have come in through existing tools. So it takes a couple of hours to run, outputs a report, and the TekDoc team can review those with you guys.
Awesome. All right. I see that Marissa commented that they can't see the thank you page. Maybe you want to just backtrack to the last slide, Kyle, and then back forward to this page.
Looks like it's all set now. Thanks,
Okay.
Marissa.
Awesome. All right, great. Were there any other questions that you saw, Kyle?
Yeah, so I see one more. How does the email encryption service work? That's a good question. So that's built into the Essentials bundle of Barracuda. So it allows users to easily send encrypted emails. So they can be policy based if there's certain things that you want all users to encrypt, for example, credit card numbers, social security numbers, HIPAA data, it'll automatically detect those. It also allows users to type a keyword or click an Outlook add-in to send those. And then it actually sends that email through our encryption service, and it sends the recipient a nice simple email letting them know they've received it. And it gives them instructions on how to access it, which is to actually log into the Barracuda portal. And from there, they can download attachments, access it, reply to it directly from there.
Great. All right, well, if there was no other questions, I think that's all we have today. And again, reach out to us if anything else comes up or you want to learn more about some of the stuff that Kyle talked about today. And thank you all again, and be well.
Thanks, everybody.